Right guys, welcome to this paper 3 exam practice video. We're going to be looking at issues and debates and more specifically culture bias. This video is going to have some short answer, application and essay questions, so I'll cover all types of questions that could potentially come up in an exam. Now before we start, don't forget that there are other exam practice videos on issues and debates already on the channel, and they also have short answer, application and essay questions in them. They're linked in the description section below, and I'll also link them at the end of the video as well, so you can go and check them out if you feel like you need to. So let's get started, and remember to hit the like button if you find this useful. So here are the 6 questions that I'm going to cover. Now, interestingly, culture bias hasn't come up very often at all yet. Sure, there have been a couple of multiple choice questions here and there, but in terms of questions that actually require a written response, culture bias is a topic that has been largely untouched by exams so far. The same is true for the idiographic and the nomothetic approaches, by the way, and a link to some exam practice on that should be at the top of your screen now so that you can go and have a look if you feel like you need to. Anyway, because it hasn't come up very often, the questions that I'm going to go through are largely just generic questions that I've put together to try and give you some idea of what you could get asked in an exam. They're not questions that have specifically been taken from past papers because, like I said, it hasn't really come up yet. Okay, so we're going to start with a couple of definition questions, just 2 markers, and then we'll move on and we'll have a look at an application question. I've got one 4 marker that's a little bit longer, and then we're going to finish off the video with an essay. Okay, we've got the 16 mark version of the essay, but we'll also have a look at the 8 mark version as well, because issues and debates in paper 3 likes to sometimes throw in an 8 marker rather than a 16 marker. Obviously there are other questions that could come up as well, but hopefully this will give you a bit of a flavor for some of the possibilities. So the first question is just a straightforward what is meant by culture bias. Okay, so it's a definition question. Culture bias is the tendency to interpret all phenomena through the lens of one's own culture, ignoring the effects that cultural differences might have on behavior. Okay, so it's 2 marks, so we're looking for roughly 2 pieces of information. In this case, it's the first little bit, a tendency to interpret all phenomena through the lens of one's own culture, comma, and then you've got your second bit of information, which then gives you your 2 marks. So question 2 is what is meant by cultural relativism? Okay, and this is one that actually has come up in an exam before. And at the time, the examiner's report remarked that most people were able to get a mark for talking about the importance of cultural norms, but very few students were able to get the full marks because they struggled to give an accurate definition. Okay, so cultural relativism is the idea that behaviors can only be meaningfully understood if we study them within the specific social and cultural contexts. It contrasts with ethnocentrism, in which behaviors are judged from the perspective of one's own culture. So you've got 2 bits of information there. Doesn't really matter where you get your 2 bits of information from. I've gone for the comparison with ethnocentrism, but that first little bit is the important bit. The fact that behaviors can only be meaningfully understood if they are studied within the cultural context that they occur. All right? So moving swiftly on to question number 3, very similar to the previous 2 questions, what is meant by ethnocentrism? It's very similar to culture bias, but it's a little bit more extreme. Okay, so ethnocentrism is when researchers judge other cultures by the standards and values of their own. And then this is the bit that is kind of a bit more extreme. In its extreme form, it is the belief in the superiority of one's own culture, which can then lead to prejudice towards others. The second sentence is the bit that highlights the ethnocentrism bit. Okay, it's not just about judging everything through your own lens, but rather it's about believing that you're correct and you are better than everybody else. Okay, so question 4 is a 4 marker. Describe 2 examples of culture bias in psychological research. So with a question like this, the key is the application to psychological research. Okay, it doesn't really matter what examples you use. There are plenty dotted around the spec. You just pick some that you are confident with. I've gone for 2 from year 1, and that is the strange situation and Ash's research. Okay, the strange situation suffers from imposed ethic. We know that it was one of the evaluation points from the actual topic at the time, because it assumes that attachment behaviors in one culture would apply to all cultures. Okay, equally, Ash assumed that all cultures would conform to the same degree as the American participants did, when in fact that wasn't the case. Okay, you've got the little bit of detail in both of those paragraphs. So we've got the reference to imposed ethic as a key word in the strange situation, but I've also got Smith and Bond as the researchers who found that collectivist cultures were more likely to conform than individualist cultures. So our final question before the essay is an application question. Now, with this one, you have to explain what's meant by ethnocentrism using the example. Okay, so chances are if this were to come up in an exam, there would be 2 marks for outline and 2 marks for application, obviously making it a 4-marker. So I'm going to start with a quick explanation of what ethnocentrism is. It's very similar to the definition I gave earlier, and then I'm going to go on and apply it to the STEM and latch on to the fact that intelligence was being measured from an American perspective under the assumptions that this was the correct perspective. Okay, I'm going to put a little sentence on the end that just highlights what the implication of that is to the non-Americans, and that is that it could result in the devaluing and the discrimination of non-Americans due to the belief that they are less intelligent. Now, there's nothing to say that you have to split it out like this, so I've gone for my description first and then my application. You don't have to do it like that. You can intertwine it into one big paragraph if you want. It's completely up to you. The only reason I've done it like this is because I like to make it very obvious where my outline is and where my application is. Okay, so if you choose to do it a different way, then that's absolutely fine, but this is generally the type of information that a question like this would be looking for. Okay, and then this is the final question, the essay question. Remember, I said at the beginning I'm going to do a 16-mark and an 8-mark version of this. So let's start with the 16-mark version and then we'll look at how to cut it down. Okay, so the question is, discuss culture bias in psychological research. So we're going to keep it nice and simple, and we're going to use all the definitions that we used earlier, and we're going to pop them all into the outline. Okay, we'll start with what culture bias is, and then we'll talk about what ethnocentrism is and what cultural relativism is as well. I'm going to put the strange situation in as an example, but you don't have to. I'm only doing it to flesh out the outline a little bit and to provide a little bit of detail. If you don't want to use an example or you can't think of an example, you could, as an alternative, talk about the difference between ethic and emic research, because I know that some of the books give you that information. It's completely up to you though. Okay, an example and ethic/emic, they would only serve as extra detail for the outline. Okay, ethic and emic aren't specifically named in the spec, so it's just there to flesh out and give you a little bit more detail. Okay, so whichever one you choose to do is absolutely fine. I'm also going to go for 4 evaluation points, but remember you don't need 4. Okay, so if you can think of 4 then great, but if you want to use 3 then that's also fine. So I'm going to start with the negative implications of culturally biased research, and I'm going to use the US Army IQ tests. It's a very famous study and most books have that in, and it led to the discrimination of non-Americans. It's effectively the same research that I used in the application question earlier. I'm then going to talk about countering culture bias through the development of indigenous psychologies, and I'm going to specifically talk about Afrocentrism, and then I'm going to end with 2 nice discussion points, one about whether culture bias is even still relevant in modern psychology, and then the second one is all about the impact of greater travel opportunities, which means that people have a greater understanding of different cultures, both personally and professionally, which then also reduces the possibility of culture bias in research. So here is the essay. You've got the outline in blue. It comes in at around 200 words. You've then got the first evaluation point about the US Army IQ tests, the second evaluation point about ethnocentrism and why that's important, and then at the end you've got your 2 discussion points to finish off the essay. Okay, if you are going to cut out evaluation points, I would suggest cutting from the bottom. So get rid of the short one first, and that leaves you with the first 3, and then get rid of the orange one if you only want 2. Now, just quickly before we finish off, this question could of course also come up as an 8 marker, and like I said before, AQA have a little bit of a habit at the minute of putting 8 markers in issues and debate sections. So if it does come up as an 8 marker, you need to slash 1 evaluation point minimum, and I would also get rid of some of the unnecessary detail in the outline. Okay, so it would look something like this. Okay, so the bits in red in the outline are the bits that I would get rid of. And remember, you still need both sides of the discussion in your evaluation section. So I would cut points 4 and 2, simply because the first point gives you the negative implications, and point 3 is nice and chunky and gives you a nice amount of discussion. Okay, if you want to keep 3 evaluation points, then keep point 2 as well, and just get rid of the last one because it's the shortest one. And that would leave you with something like this. Okay, a nice, short, concise essay. Your outline is going to come in at about 120 words, give or take, and then you've got 2 evaluation points minimum. Like I said, if you want to add in that third one, then by all means do that. And that brings us to the end of the video. I hope it's all made sense and I hope it's been useful. On your screen now you should see links to some more issues and debates exam practice for you to have a look at, and then I'll chuck a few more in the description section below as well. Okay, if you found it useful, please remember to let me know by hitting the like button. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.